I want you to play just a minute of a very nauseating interview that CNN did of the two survivors of the Florida shooting, because there's something about this video that is even more upsetting, sinister, and peculiar, and something that looks even more staged than David Hogg's testimony. Take a look at this clip, viewers, and see if you can see what it is that's disturbing me about the footage from this interview. Roll this clip.
How do you expect politicians who need money to keep running for office to say no to the NRA?
Because we keep telling them that if they accept this blood money, they're against the children. They're against the people who are dying.
Look at the car. Look at the dog. Look at the dog in the car.
At this point, you're either funding the killers or you are...
If you can look behind that strange Sigourney Weaver-esque bald lesbianic Hispanic girl and skeletal sinister David Hogg, look behind.
You wrote a scathing review about Ghostbusters.
I thought it was quite measured. It's just that everybody else was lying that they liked the movie when nobody really did.
And then what happened?
So I exchanged some words with Leslie Jones, one of the leads, who I was unimpressed with. Like, I was unimpressed with all of them. I cracked some jokes. I was mean and bitchy, like I always am. And if I crack a few jokes at a Hollywood megastar's expense, so what?
So I printed out a couple of those. Just
go right ahead.
Okay, so
I posted them. I'm sure I'm
right.
fine.
So
yeah, I said the women in it were fat and ugly and fat, and they are, and I'll tell you why I find this problematic. We've started to marginalize traditional beauty standards, you know. Now what we're expected to do is to celebrate body positivity and you know, that it's okay to abuse their bodies, to run the risk of horrible diseases and awful chronic conditions and to die sooner. That's horrible. What I'm trying to do is draw attention to a critique of what's happening in mainstream beauty culture, and that comes from compassion about what the messages we're sending to young girls.
So is that compassionate, though, saying they're fat, ugly, ugly?
The piece comes from compassion. I mean, this is just a little bitchy tweet. Who cares?
Okay, so according to Jack Dorsey, though, the tweets that followed after your review of Ghostbusters, it was just too much.
There's no question that some of the things that were sent to her were horrible, but I'm not in the business of policing the 300 million people on Twitter. Now, I'm not going to endorse anything horrible that people said to her. Obviously, there were some things that were said to her that were disgusting, right? But I'm not in the business of language policing other people. I'm only responsible for what I say. And the things that you have presented to me, I'm perfectly happy to, I would say them again tomorrow.
What would you say to Leslie Jones right now if you had an opportunity to sit with her, now that kind of the dust has settled a little bit? What would you say to her?
I would say to her, you are a star of a Hollywood blockbuster. What are you doing sitting at home on your iPhone getting upset about idiots posting nonsense stuff on the internet? That's insane to me.
So there's a bit of irony in this. I'm thinking about this 2012 op-ed that you wrote that I'm sure you've heard about.
Yes, you all have the same research as you guys, because you all share
I mean, it stuck out like come on, it was like a red flag. You wrote, the internet distances us from others and feeds the traits of sociopathy, saying perhaps what's needed now is a bolder form of censure after all. If people cannot be trusted to treat one another with respect, dignity, and consideration. You wrote that.
I did. I think it's fair to say my feelings have evolved on that subject.
And how did they evolve?
Well, I think 4 years of being on Twitter and being on Facebook and watching how these companies operate, but also realizing that you know, the trolls often aren't the bad guys. Often the trolls are the only ones telling the truth.
What about an apology for maybe what your followers, because what Twitter, how Twitter sees it is that you sort of move that kind of momentum that...
Well, I'm sorry for being popular. They need new ways of making sure that people who don't want to hear from each other don't really hear from each other. My purpose is to lob bombs. My purpose is to be a fire starter, right? In an outrage culture, I think the appropriate response is to be outrageous, because what I want to do is smash political correctness. I don't want everyone to be like me, but I think it's important that there are some people like me.
Your tweets offended people. They just did. What do you say to those? What do you say to those people? I mean, it's the offensive comments that were made.
Yes, I say good. Good. If I offended you, that's me performing my function. And you should grow thicker skin and grow up. And so long as there are people who think that offense-taking and you know, having grievances is equivalent to some genuine kind of injury, I'm still necessary. You may disagree with me. That's fine. Come debate me. But so long as there is a politics in this country, as there is, where people can turn victimhood and grievance into currency, I will continue to be as offensive as possible.
First off, I'd like to say, g'day, cunt. Also, Second of all, I'd like to say I'm sort of new into the whole politics sort of thing, and I'm sort of leaning right at the moment. I'd like to know what's good. Where's a good place to learn about both sides without fucking listening to mainstream media, because they only go towards the left, and I want to know. Hold on, I want to know more about this side instead of just hearing that I'm a fucking racist bigot all the time. All right?
Right. Good. That's a good question. My advice to people who want to know about politics is to read Plutarch. Stop reading The Guardian and the Sydney Morning Herald, but also, just for a while, just briefly, also stop reading stuff on our side. Stop reading Breitbart, stop reading The Spectator, stop reading everything, and go back to Plutarch. Read Plutarch's Lives. Read some of the texts that form the foundations of modern civilization. J.S. Mill's On Liberty. Learn about the harm principle. Because most of the arguments that we have, political arguments that we have, that seem very complicated, this stuff about toxic masculinity and all of the, the feminist stuff and the race stuff, all of it boils down to a couple of very basic fundamental principles that are all there for you to read, from the Romans and Greeks through to the Victorians. And there hasn't really been very much new since. I mean, politics has not really evolved much since Marx. There's nothing new since Marx. So I would encourage you to read widely, but read old stuff, because as soon as you have a grounding, if you have an education, if you have a deep and excellent knowledge of philosophy and history and politics from the ancient world through to the Victorians, everything that's happening now becomes crystal clear to you. You can understand where everyone's coming from. You understand why certain movements are the way they are, where stuff comes from. You understand that social justice, feminism, Black Lives Matter, is Marxism. It's the economic system of Marxism mapped onto social issues. So the cis-het white patriarchy is the oppressive bourgeoisie, whatever. The oppressed classes of the in the factories become blacks, women, gays, all the rest of it. And you understand where these disciplines come from, and with that, how to beat them, and which ones you agree with.
Let's go to the audio sound bites. Now, I'll get to the Victor Davis Hanson stuff and Michael Walsh in due course. I'm not trying to string you along. I just want to try to get as much in here in the first hour, set the table, start the stuff, cover things, and get back to them in detail. The first, I guess, soundbite deals with, I went back and forth on even playing this, because this is just absurd. But this, I decided to play it because it's an illustration of just who the media is and how off the wall and unobjective and unaware that they are. And it also demos what their agenda is. Now, you may have heard that the CPAC people had invited Milo Yiannopoulos to keynote the CPAC convention, which starts this weekend. And there was an uproar from mainstream conservatism over this. Many were just curious, angry. How in the hell could this happen? Who thinks that Milo Yiannopoulos is mainstream conservatism? So anyway, a videotape was uncovered of Milo talking about things that could be construed to be pedophilia. CPAC pulled him. They yanked his appearance. And Simon & Schuster's now canceled the book contract they had with him. So he's not going to... This is a red meat for the media. And it was actually served to them. They didn't have to make this up. CPAC actually gave them this one. But I want you to listen. This is Alison Camerata. Now, Alison Camerata used to be at Fox. And I've only met her a couple times. She's nice as she could be. And she asked me, I don't know how many times. She was the weekend host of the Saturday edition of Fox and Friends, the early morning show. She politely asked me over and over to appear on the program. And ultimately I said, yes, I would do it. It was a phoner. And she was perfectly fine. She was perfectly nice. And she knows who I am. She knows what I do and who I am. But you'd never know it listening to this soundbite. She's talking with Chris Cuomo who thinks communism is about elevating economic standards for people. He really gave the Cuban dictators a piece of his mind. He said, when are these communists going to understand? They're going to have to start improving living conditions for people. I said, what? When has communism ever done that? That's not what communism does. Anyway, he thinks it is. He's the son of Mario the Pious, the late Mario the Pious, former governor of New York, and just would be, oh my God, they couldn't wait for him to be elected president, but it never happened. So they're talking about Milo and CPAC canceling his appearance.
Provocateurs have taken the place of conventional leadership because it's juicier and it's more headline grabbing, and you can build more blogs around it, and you can build more websites around it.
The only major one is Trump. When you say provocateurs, I mean, really, he filled the entire space in terms of who succeeded on that. I mean, this guy, to compare this guy from Breitbart to Trump is insulting to Trump.
Well, I'm not comparing him to Trump. I'm comparing him to Rush Limbaugh and to other right-wing.
It's even insulting to those guys.
I get it, but I think that what your point was is that people who sort of say the most outlandish things right now, and as we know, they don't necessarily have to be fact-based, get a lot of attention.
All right, so Allison Camerata has decided that I am Milo Yiannopoulos. Now, how absurd. And she knows better. She knows it's not even close. It's ridiculous. It is preposterous. And yet there she is on CNN drawing the comparison on the basis that I don't mean what I say. I'm just a provocateur. I'm just saying what I say to attract attention to myself. If I wanted to attract attention to myself, I'd be doing television every day. If I wanted to attract attention to myself, I'd have a PR firm and you'd be nothing but seeing stories about me in the media every day. I do not want any part of that. I've been there, done that, and it's phony baloney, plastic banana, good time, rock and roll. I'm not into that at all. I'm not into being. I just tell people what I think. And it used to be things that she agreed with. So this is an example where the media thinks everybody over here is off the charts, false, untrue, saying things just to get noticed. And she doesn't even see, and nor do any of the others in the media. They have no sense of self-awareness. They really don't. They haven't the foggiest idea why people are angry at them. You know something? I've said it before. The media is the only business in the world where the customer is always wrong. If you're a news consumer, if you're a customer, and you complain to them, they will tell you that you are not sophisticated enough to understand what they do. And they'll tell you to go listen or watch somewhere else. They're not even really doing the news for you. They're doing news for other journalists and other people in government because that's their real audience, as evidenced by CNN's ratings. They don't have any compared to other news organizations. They don't seem to be bothered by it at all. They don't seem to be doing anything to try to change it at all.